The chandelier above the long mahogany table glowed like a crown, its light catching the silverware, the wine glasses, and the carefully rehearsed smiles of everyone seated. Laughter danced around the room, the kind that hides old wounds beneath fine dining and expensive perfumes. Kelvin sat quietly at the far end, his plate barely touched. He had learned long ago that in this family, silence was safer than honesty. Then it happened. His father's voice, deep, commanding, the kind that silenced rooms, sliced through the laughter. "Kelvin," he said, setting his wine glass down, "we've decided it's best if you step back from family affairs." The words dropped heavy, like stones thrown into still water. The laughter died mid-echo. The air turned thick. Kelvin looked up slowly, searching faces that refused to meet his eyes. His mother adjusted her napkin, pretending to be focused on her plate. His elder brother, Tayo, leaned back with that proud smirk that Kelvin had seen since childhood, the smirk of someone who always won without trying. No one spoke for him. No one asked why. It was as if everyone had agreed before the dinner even began. "You've done well enough," his father continued, his tone cold and managerial. "But we think Tayo should take the lead moving forward. The estate, the business, all of it. You can focus on something else." Something else. The phrase echoed in Kelvin's chest like a locked door slamming shut. For years, he had carried the family's burdens, managing accounts, fixing Tayo's mistakes, taking calls late at night when his father's health failed. Now, all of that meant nothing. Tayo chuckled under his breath, swirling his drink. "Don't take it personally, little brother. Some of us are just better at leadership." Kelvin's jaw tightened. The old him would have argued, demanded fairness. But not tonight. He slowly wiped his mouth with his napkin, folded it neatly, and placed it beside his plate. Then he stood. The chair scraped softly against the marble floor, and in that sound, small as it was, the whole table seemed to flinch. Kelvin didn't shout. He didn't beg. He just nodded once, looked at his father, and said quietly, "Understood." Then he turned and walked away. No one stopped him. Not his father, not his mother, not even the brother who had stolen his place. As the heavy doors closed behind him, the laughter began again, forced, nervous, echoing in a house that no longer felt like home. But outside, under the night sky, a sleek black car waited, engine purring softly, headlights cutting through the darkness. Kelvin opened the door, stepped inside, and exhaled slowly. His heart was heavy, yes, but somewhere beneath the hurt, something fierce was awakening. They thought they had pushed him aside. They thought this was his ending. But the car waiting outside wasn't just a ride home. It was the beginning of a life they could never imagine. Kelvin never forgot that dinner table. The echo of his mother's words, "You're not like your brother," carved itself into his bones, deeper than any scar. That night, he learned something every broken child eventually learns. Love can be conditional, and respect can be currency. Growing up in that house felt like living in a museum of hypocrisy. His father, a deacon on Sundays, would thunder about integrity, but every Wednesday, a church meeting kept him out till midnight. His mother preached humility, but never missed a chance to remind the neighbors that Daniel got admission to the University of Lagos. And Kelvin? He was the son who was trying, the one who fixed the leaking roof but never got thanked. The one who made sure his younger sister got to school, even when he had to trek himself. He learned early that goodness didn't always get applause, and sometimes, the quiet ones are the ones plotting revolutions. As the years rolled by, the same double standards that once broke him began to build him. He became observant, watching how people lie with their smiles, how family politics can destroy destinies, and how power isn't always loud. Sometimes, it whispers through obedience. At 16, he stopped trying to please anyone. At 17, he started making money fixing phones in the neighborhood. At 18, he was already lending his older brother cash, the same brother whose name his parents used as a weapon. But deep inside, Kelvin carried that dinner table inside him. Every rejection, every insult, every quiet humiliation. They didn't know it then, but they weren't breaking him, they were forging him. He learned that you don't need to shout to be powerful. You just need patience and memory. So when he finally walked away from home at 19, he didn't slam the door. He smiled, because he understood something they never would, that the same pain they used to silence him would one day make him unforgettable. And it did. Years later, when the name Kelvin Adeyemi began echoing in business circles, when his company started acquiring others like chess pieces, when politicians started calling him sir, and journalists called him a mystery billionaire, one quiet question lingered in his mother's heart. Could this be the same boy we once ignored at the dinner table? Pain had been Kelvin's first teacher, but silence became his greatest weapon. In Lagos, where noise often passes for success, Kelvin learned the rare art of moving quietly. While others fought for validation, he built, slowly, carefully, like a man planting trees in secret, knowing one day he'd sit in their shade. Every betrayal from his childhood became a lesson in human behavior. He understood how people crave attention, how greed hides behind family smiles, how respect is rarely given freely. It's earned, often with quiet precision. When Kelvin started his first company, Zenitech Solutions, he named it after the one thing he lacked growing up: peace. He didn't start big. Just a few computers in a cramped room in Yaba, a handful of loyal boys who believed in him. But while others chased clients, Kelvin chased patterns. He studied how people move when they want something, how investors smile before they strike. It was all a game, and Kelvin had finally learned the rules. Money came, slowly at first, then like a flood. But he didn't flaunt it. No loud cars, no champagne. He wore simplicity like armor, a clean shirt, calm eyes, and that quiet voice that made people lean closer when he spoke. And yet, every move he made carried poetry. The same uncle who once mocked him for wasting his life found himself begging for a business partnership years later. Kelvin smiled, signed the papers, and later bought the man's company from under him. He didn't do it for revenge, at least not loudly. His revenge was elegance, success so silent it echoed. At night, when the city slept, Kelvin would sometimes sit by his office window and remember that dinner table, the laughter that excluded him, the words that made him small. And he'd smile, not with bitterness, but with power. Because now, he was the one deciding who eats at his table. But the real victory wasn't the money. It was control over himself, over his emotions, over a world that once ignored him. He no longer needed to prove them wrong. He had already outgrown the need. His silence now spoke louder than his parents' praise ever could. And those who once called him a failure could only watch as he built an empire, one quiet, calculated decision at a time. Kelvin had become the very thing they never saw coming, a man forged by pain, refined by patience, and crowned by silence. Years passed. Kelvin's name had become a quiet thunder across Lagos. He didn't chase recognition, but recognition chased him. Politicians invited him to dinners, billionaires quoted his ideas. His company's logo was on skyscrapers that now kissed the same sky he once prayed under. But one evening, something unusual happened. A call from home. It had been years since he'd heard that voice. His mother's tone was smaller now, her pride swallowed by worry. "Kelvin," she began, voice trembling, "your father's business, it's gone. The bank took the house. Your brother, he's not been the same." For a long moment, Kelvin said nothing. He stared out his glass window, watching the city lights shimmer like the stars he once wished upon. It felt poetic, the same family that once ignored his hunger, now calling from a place of need. The same table that once rejected him was now empty. When he finally returned home, it wasn't as the forgotten son. He arrived in a convoy, black SUVs rolling through the same dusty street where he used to trek barefoot to school. Neighbors peered from behind curtains, whispering his name like it was a miracle. Inside, the atmosphere was heavy, the house older, the air quieter. His father, frail now, looked up at him with tired eyes. His mother couldn't meet his gaze. And Daniel, the golden son, sat in the corner, defeated, his former pride shattered. No one spoke for a while. until his father said softly, "Kelvin, we made mistakes, but you're still our son." Kelvin looked at them all. The memories flashed, the mockery, the rejection, the silence at the dinner table. But then he remembered something deeper, the strength he gained because of it. He walked slowly to the old table, the same one where his mother once said, "You're not like your brother." He placed his hand on it and said quietly, "You were right. I'm not like him. I never was. But maybe that's what saved me." Silence filled the room. Then he added, "This time, everyone eats. But we eat with understanding." And just like that, Kelvin rebuilt the house, not just in bricks, but in dignity. He paid the debts, restored their home, and even set up a foundation in his father's name. But he didn't stay. He had learned that forgiveness doesn't always mean returning. Sometimes, it just means releasing the weight you no longer need to carry. That night, as he drove back to the city, Kelvin smiled to himself. He realized something powerful. The table had turned, yes. But more than that, he had become the table. And those who once denied him a seat now depended on the space he built. The night was quiet, Legos humming faintly in the distance. Kelvin sat alone on the rooftop of his penthouse, staring at the skyline his own hands helped shape. Towers of glass and steel gleamed under the moonlight, monuments not just to wealth, but to endurance. It had been months since he returned home. His family was stable again, though still walking carefully around the cracks time could never fully repair. But Kelvin didn't hold grudges anymore. He had realized something powerful. Revenge may taste sweet, but peace lasts longer. He leaned back in his chair, remembering the boy he used to be, the one who was laughed at, overlooked, told he'd never be enough. That boy had died the day he stopped seeking validation. In his place stood a man who learned that silence is not weakness, it's strategy. His assistant once asked him, "Sir, how did you do it? How did you rise so fast without noise?" Kelvin smiled and replied, "Because I learned early that lions don't roar to prove they're lions. They roar only when it's necessary." He thought about that dinner table, the first battlefield of his life, how it broke him, how it shaped him, how it prepared him for boardrooms and betrayals far colder than family dinners. But now, he understood, the real victory was not that he built an empire. The real victory was that he didn't let bitterness build him. His story wasn't just about rising, it was about transforming pain into purpose, rejection into rhythm, silence into empire. Every lesson his family unknowingly taught him had become the foundation of his success. Their neglect made him self-reliant. Their comparison made him competitive. Their silence made him strategic. Now, his empire stretched beyond business. It was in the lives he changed, the young men he mentored, the scholarships he funded for children who reminded him of himself. As the first light of dawn touched the horizon, Kelvin whispered to himself, "Power isn't in being seen. Power is in being remembered." He stood, straightened his suit, and looked out once more at the city below. Lagos was waking up, restless, noisy, alive, and somewhere within that chaos, the echoes of one man's silence still ruled. Kelvin smiled. He had come full circle, from the boy they ignored to the man whose silence built an empire. They never saw him coming, not because he hid, but because they never looked deep enough to see who he was becoming. Kelvin's story isn't about revenge, it's about evolution. A boy who learned that sometimes silence isn't weakness, it's the rehearsal of power. When they mocked him, he listened. When they doubted him, he observed. And when they turned their backs, he turned his pain into blueprints. Blueprints that built the life they said he'd never have. He didn't fight for validation. He built something greater, proof. Proof that you don't need applause to know your worth. Proof that the most dangerous man in the room is the one who doesn't need to speak to be felt. Now, they whisper his name with respect. The same lips that once dismissed him now pray for his presence. And that old dinner table, it still stands, but it's no longer his prison. It's his reminder that every rejection was direction, every silence a seed, music rises softly. Because in the end, Kelvin didn't just build an empire, he became one. An empire of discipline, of calm, of silence. And sometimes, the loudest roar is the one whispered in peace.